Hello, everyone. It's December the 19th. It's THCB gang, and second time this week because of the my travels to Japan. I'm Matthew Holt, your host, and today we have a special one. We have three of the real heroes and veterans of the sort of activist, patient evangelist online movement, who are going to talk to you all about the latest developments in patients and their use of AI in healthcare. So we actually even have a title for this one suggested by our trio here. Patients use AI. Hugo, Gilles, and ePatient Dave on the race to patient autonomy. And we have Hugo Campos, Gilles Frydman and ePatient Dave deBronkart. Hugo, known best among many other things for being the guy who extracted his data from his own implanted medical device. And I think went to the mat with Medtronic to get access to it and figure out that it was his data, not their data. Gilles Frydman, way back when in the 90s, started ACOR, the online cancer series of listservs that has been really great help to patients forever. And ePatient Dave deBronkart became a very, very noisy patient activist after being diagnosed with cancer in the 2000s. Gents, really wonderful to see you, all of you. It's been a while since I see some of you. I see that Gilles is hanging out in Colombia now. Hugo, I think, is still somewhere in California, and Dave has never left Massachusetts, I understand. Maybe he has once or twice. Um, so let's start kind of with the beginning. No, I mean, I don't know when the beginning actually really was, but somewhere around 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, ChatGPT 4 came out, and suddenly the level of ability of uh, large language models and intelligent search just made an exponential jump. I actually was at a lecture listening to the history of AI, and really this stuff people were postulating about it in the mid 2010s, but the actual sort of mechanics of it coming together and starting to actually really be able to tell good stories and answer questions intelligently started really with 2022. It's certainly been growing since then, and I think it's become something that a lot of patients are starting to use, and a lot of healthcare professionals are trying to figure out how they will work with patients using it. So I will shut up. Dave, you've been writing and talking about this quite a lot. I actually quoted you in I quoted you and you put your picture up about this in a speech I gave in Japan last week. So,
Really?
expect the Japanese, your Japanese fans to start deluging you. But why don't you just Dave, I'll start with you. Start riffing on what you think here is going on and what it means and how things are getting used. Just give me a sense about how you think this is changing the patient experience.
So I want to start with just briefly touching on my cancer adventure in 2007. Uh, as everyone here knows, I was diagnosed as almost dead out of nowhere. I had a shoulder x-ray that said, dude, there's something in your lung near the shoulder. It was tumors of kidney cancer. That's pretty advanced when you've got kidney tissue growing in your lung. And uh, I was supposed to die, but I got connected by my PCP, the famous Dr. Danny Sands, with Gilles Frydman, who had started this cancer patient network called ACOR, and where they had a good kidney cancer patient community. And I want to make something really clear because I have no clue what mix of people might be listening here. The common response from many doctors has always been patients should stay off the internet. All right. Now, this was back in 2007. And what Dr. Sands did was he showed me where to find the good stuff. All right. And if we have any medical students listening to this, this is your invitation to just race in through the open door and start doing things in ways that elders cannot comprehend could even be possible. Long story short, I was diagnosed in January. There was only one treatment that might save me. By July, my treatment had ended, and I've had nothing since then. And my oncologist a few years later said that in the BMJ said that he doesn't think I could have tolerated enough medicine if I hadn't been so well prepared. And he was talking about information I got from patients on ACOR. And now this blows open the widespread obsolete paradigm assumption that the only place to get reliable or good information that can save your life is from the medical literature or from doctors. But you may recall, I think you and I first met at the was it, I don't know, Connected Health or Health 2.0, I don't know. It was in October of 2008. Clay Shirky was there, and he made this remark in his closing comments when everybody was saying, well, wait a minute, the patients on ACOR don't know what they're doing. They better come to us for advice. And Shirky said, the patients on ACOR don't need our advice and they don't need our help. All right, now that was 2008. Here we are 16 years later, and people are still saying, well, wait a minute, the patients using AI might not know what they're doing. They better come to us for advice. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that Eric Topol last week at a conference started his remarks by saying to other doctors, the patients are way ahead of what we are doing, and we better catch up. All right. So the thing to look at here is, and I am, in case anybody wonders, I'm a huge fan of doctors doing good medicine. I haven't stopped seeing doctors or anything of the sort, but there is this essential question: what is it that patients cannot do on their own and can do with the assistance of doctors? And it used to be that a large part of that was access to the medical literature, but then along came PubMed, and we have some access to that. And then then just Googling in general, and also seeking things on our own, according to our own priorities. But then the huge breakthrough, I was actually quoted in the New York Times in September on this. I said, Google as a librarian, AI gives us access to clinical thought. All right, you can present a complicated problem to these things. In fact, the more complicated your description is, the more it will star. And it will do what it can. Now, there is no guarantee that it will get it right on the first try, but Hugo was the first one to put this into words. It's so important, I call it Hugo's Law. He said, Dave, I don't ask these things for answers. I use it to help me think. He's thinking, and he never takes action based on what one AI said. He always gets a second opinion. The breakthrough here is, surprise, surprise, obsolete doctors. Maybe we can think on our own, and we would like you to help us. My ideal vision is a world where, in the same way Danny Sands in 2007 showed me where to find the good stuff, right? I have a doctor who works with me using generative AI for both of us to work together to pursue my goals. So I could go on and on. I don't even know if I answered your original question, because that's what you get with me.
Well, that's, I mean, so I think that's very important context, right? And if I remember, Susanna Fox used to quote the AMA somewhere around 2001,
yeah.
saying, trust your doctor, don't trust the chat room. You did trust the chat room. It really helped. There are clearly chat rooms and chat rooms. There are levels of verified expertise from patients online. Gilles hosted and created, hosted, and contextualized communities of really strong patient experts. You obviously, all three of you are in that category. And there are different levels of that. There are presumably different levels of response from AI as well. And as you mentioned, Hugo's talking about, Hugo's law is started as give it more complex data and get a second opinion. Can one of you perhaps say what is the sort of current experience of how you're seeing people start to use the big LLMs, OpenAI, Claude, whomever, sort of on a day-to-day basis? What experiences and stories are you hearing? I mean, how have you been using it, and what experiences and stories have you been hearing about how people are using it?
So I'm going to hijack the conversation and not answer your question, but
that's
just
okay.
follow
Hijack away. I don't expect anything else from a crazy French man.
What Dave said. So by the time he discovered the ACOR community, there were still a lot of doctors saying, do not get on the internet, it's dangerous. And that made me think. We were having a conversation a few days ago. It's true. The internet, some communities are good, some are bad. So you have to know what you are doing. But should we say to doctors, or should we say to patients, stop going to see doctors because you have bad doctors? It's the same thing. Both of those are completely absurd. What turns out is that in good communities, you have the best information that exists for patients surfaced and given to people that in general would never have discovered that information, because some patients were going to see the best specialist and surface the information they got from those specialists. The amazing thing is that GenAI can do this today. So the community that we started basically a generation ago needed to have a fairly large number of people to be able to produce all this information. And GenAI can do it today, and you can get the same kind of value on your own if you learn how to use those tools. ACOR was useful only if you learn to use the tool that those communities were providing. If you were coming to thought that you were going to get some magic answers, that wouldn't work. And it's the same with GenAI. If you think that you're just going to go and without learning how to use the tool, you're going to get amazing response, it's not going to work. We'll discuss this, I think, a little later. So the two other gentlemen are the ones that are spending their time looking into real cases of people using AI, and I'm going to let them speak.
Well, but just for we want to hear Hugo and Dave again. I mean, I think you've got the same issue, right? So back in the day, you had online communities. You had some people who were real patient experts up on the latest literature show, working with the top specialists. You had others who were, working with quacks or were quacks who were spreading dubious information. You have much bigger issues with misinformation now. You have millions and billions of people on the internet rather than, a few million. And obviously you have AI, which can both be producing great information, but also can, in some cases kind of hallucinate and needs to be checked and challenged, right? So, you've still got the same issue where you need to have sort of credible, sensible use of the tool. But I think there's a lot that can be done with, there's so much can be done with the access to information data. Hugo, we haven't heard from you yet. So can you dive in a bit on what you've been experiencing and what you've been learning?
Yeah, I thanks. I'll be glad to go into it. Before I go into any examples, let me just sort of point out the fact that the reason folks are using these tools is because oftentimes the system isn't available to them. It's either folks waiting for months for an appointment with a specialist, or they don't have access to health for some reason. There are language barriers, there are information asymmetry. There are a number of barriers to access that AI solves in ways that we've never had, specifically generative AI I'm talking about. It solves in ways that we've never had before. And this is really important for patients, particularly people living with chronic conditions. If you consider folks who are like me, who live with a chronic condition, in my case, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a type of heart muscle disease, most of my time is spent in self-care. And that's really where AI has the biggest potential to help. It's not in the clinical encounters. It's not really copying, helping the doctor write the note or helping the doctor figure out CPT codes from the notes, and none of that. I mean, this stuff is I suppose, hopefully, great for the doctor. We'll see in the long term. But I think for the patient, where AI really is useful is in the space of self-care. I wanted to highlight the fact that the reason I engaged was exactly because I didn't have the correct diagnosis or the correct treatment when I started my journey with cardiomyopathy in 2004. And it was in the communities, the online communities, that I found information from patient experts who knew quite a bit more than the clinicians who were treating me, and had time and the ability to willingness to help guide me in those early days. And that's where, again, AI it can take on some of those roles of supporting the patient along along their wherever they are in the course with the journey with the disease, speaking the language of the patient in the level that the patient understands. And these are things that are not really existing in healthcare. So yeah, one of the use cases for me particularly, and I can go further into it if you'd like, but I'll give you a high-level example. As my dad lives with me. He's 94 years old and has a number of conditions, and he speaks mostly Portuguese. And I often use these tools to help read the note from his encounters and translate it to Portuguese in a way that removes the jargon, that helps him have a voice in his own care and participate. That, again, it's a use case that does not exist in the healthcare system even when it's available to us. Anyway, I'll stop here.
I mean, that's super helpful and good to think. And I think we should break down later into sort of how we think this is developing into both sort of figuring out diagnosis, figuring out day-to-day care, and then figuring out the different sets of tools that are being used. But Dave, tell us a little bit about what you've just written about and what you've posted, because obviously you've been looking at this for a while.
Boy, where do I start? There's
somewhere close to the beginning.
I have
the end.
I have a page of notes in response to what Gilles and Hugo have just shared. I really want people to understand this is a big change in the flow of value, the genesis and flow of value in the form of access to knowledge and information and access to skills. I'll do a screen share here briefly and look at, let's see. Okay, let's see if I can. I guess I'll share the entire screen here. So back in early 2023, the phenomenal Grace Cordovano, who uses AI like crazy herself, she's a board-certified patient advocate. She was on a call with a bunch of us, an informal call, and from what we were all hearing about AI, she said people need to realize patients are end users, because all of the talk was about what doctors are going to do for us using AI and what tools they would give us. And so it was on that day that this hashtag PatientsUseAI was born, and we identified these 5 different categories of things. And let me see, so this Substack blog exists now with only about a dozen so far. I'm very, very interested in hearing more stories from people about what they're doing. So anybody can go there and just comment and volunteer a story.
And the blog, by the way, is PatientsUseAI Substack, or
PatientsUseAI.substack.com. Yes. Yep. Or if you just Google PatientsUseAI, well, this is what will come up. And in the post today about our session that we're doing here, this is it's a word of truth, a turning point in patient power. This is a graphic that I had Dolly create for a talk I gave in the Netherlands in May. And the concluding slide was this woman. I chose a woman partly because women's struggles for empowerment closely match patient struggles for empowerment, and also because women provide most of the family health care in the world. She's throwing off the shackles, riding on the waves of social change that we're going through. And in her hand, she's holding the tablet that's giving her the data. And this is all against the backdrop of this supernova of energy that AI is provided. And when I talk about this, I always talk about how there's this question. People talk about patient empowerment. Oh, we're going to empower patients with a new way to make appointments. Dude, you do not understand what power is. Power is the ability to say, no, I ain't going to do that. Or I want to go this way, or I want to go that way. And the World Bank for decades has been studying women's empowerment, women in villages and cities around the world. And just 1 year ago this month, they came out with this new framework for understanding it. And they say empowerment happens by removing constraints. Now, that brings us to the question, what's holding people back, right? Hugo, with the horrible rash his father was experiencing, what was holding him back 5 years ago from solving that? Well, there's all kinds of things. I don't want to give a whole keynote speech about it here, but the World Bank broke it down into agency. That's realizing that you can take action and developing the skills to do it. Resources, which for us is data and apps. And then context. Context is a social setting that allows us to pursue our goals. And this is what's happening now. What Hugo achieved with his father. Look, some of this is amazing stuff, like difficult diagnosis. I imagine most of our listeners have heard of Courtney Morales Hoffman, this mom in Michigan whose 3-year-old stopped developing properly. They saw 17 doctors over the course of 3 years. They got no successful diagnosis. And one night she sat down at 10 p.m. with ChatGPT. She apologized to her little kid for putting his health data on the internet. And she learned GPT. She spent 4 hours and eventually came up with what turned out to be the correct diagnosis. And 6 weeks later, it had been confirmed by doctors. They had surgery and he was cured. Notice some people think patients using AI is a rejection of doctors. Ladies and gentlemen, they've been to 17, right? The question is, what do you do when you're at the end of your rope or you can't get to a doctor, right? This comprehending medical records. My wife has spine problems in her neck. We had an MRI recently. She had an MRI recently, and I typed the report into GPT and said, explain this to me in English. And then I realized she had one 2 years ago. I pasted that in too and said, now tell me what changes you see. And it walked us through C1, C2, C2, C3, all the way through. Constraints. We couldn't understand that by ourselves. And now we had a vivid picture of what was going on. So when the time came to talk to the doctor, we were infinitely more informed. So as I say here, this is not about ditching doctors. And I'd like to pass it back to somebody else now.
So let me ask all of you about this. Can you if you could wind down to the bit for those of you looking on the video that shows those 5 functions? I'm going to ask about the 5 and introduce the 6. So the 5 functions are patient admin burden. That is things like, scheduling and using agents for that kind of stuff, which is again,
no, fighting back against insurance.
Well, I was going to get there a second, but also,
yeah.
We'll talk. There are a couple of things which I want. So maybe that. So there are things that you could use which are pure admin, organizing records, and that's kind of what Hugo and you've just been talking about, right? Sort of putting data from records and either translating it to a language, translating it to a reading level, asking the LLM to point out areas for investigation improvement. The diagnosis comprehension, which is helping, which is related to that, of course.
Oh,
Diagnosis, which you mentioned with this case of the one with the 3-year-old in Michigan, but plenty of other things again coming from records, and that's being used, I think, by more and more by doctors as well. You're seeing more and more companies trying to read the entire both structured and unstructured data in medical records and claims and elsewhere to come up with differential diagnosis, and then of course exploration of knowledge, options, treatment pathways. Now, you could argue that a lot of this stuff is, especially on the exploring knowledge and options, has been available both in consumer terms and obviously in access to PubMed and what have you before, but it's never been as easily available and easily able to be curated the way that the ChatGPT does it. I would add a couple more things to this. You call it may be admin burden, but it's also dealing with responses to, and it's been used by doctors as well, responses to stuff that's heavily in the news right now, denials and rebuffment by payment and administrative utilization management and prior auth and all that kind of stuff from insurance companies. And there's another one that Dr. Robbie Pearl's been talking about, which is finally large language models taking structured data that monitors chronically ill patients and showing exceptions to sort of to standard numbers from that, and using that as kind of as a level above just the data in remote monitoring to figure out who we should be intervening with, whether that's to the patient, to the doctor, the caregivers, or to others. So I mean, I think there's a number of ways that this can be used. So what I'd like to hear from all of you is where do you think, I mean, and maybe put this on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever, where do you think in all those different categories, where's the most activity now amongst the patient groups that you're seeing?
So there is one thing that Gen AI does that could never been done before with search engines and PubMed and all of this. AI is amazingly good at cognitive abstractions, like data processing and analysis of complex text.
Okay.
Search engine could not do that. They could find you the place where that data or this text or this knowledge is, but you had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what to do with it. So I'll give you one example of something that the smart users of ACOR helped me understood. Many of the ACOR communities were for rare cancers, and it was very difficult to find out which specialists exist for their rare cancer. An engineer found the perfect solution. You go to PubMed, you look for papers that have been published about research on your rare cancers, and you look at the authors of those papers. And doing this, you will find out who are the specialists for this rare condition. I did the same using AI. And instead of spending 3 hours to find the solution, in 5 minutes, I could tell you who on the East Coast or in the Midwest were the researchers that currently do research and publish.
Oh, and with a lot less skill, right?
Sorry?
And with a lot less skill than it would have taken, more of an ordinary person could do what you did with the AI, or is it still comparable skill level compared to having to weed through PubMed?
So I have this skill because I learned how to do this from ACOR.
Okay.
So one more time, this is the conversation we have had many times. AI is incredibly useful and powerful, but we're going to need a big public campaign to help people understand how to prompt those tools. If you do not know how to prompt them, the benefits is going to be kind of minimal. So
let's do two things. First off, I want a sort of general score from you as you've been surveying the landscape. How are people currently now using AI, and what flavor of number of patients are doing this? I mean, years back, I used to try to calculate percentage of patients who were accessing, and Susanna Fox and others were sort of looking at how many patients are accessing the information, accessing the internet for consumer information about that is easy. So obviously, you've had companies like WebMD and others build that, and Mayo Clinic build solutions for that. So how big a deal is this sort of use of ChatGPT and large language models for right now? And then the second question, as Gilles said, is how do we help people get on and use these? So connect answers to both those two, please.
I think
Hugo,
Dave
you want to
has,
say anything?
I think Dave has more statistics about the number of people using AI for medicine.
Yeah, I don't have statistics. I mean, there was a KFF published something a few months ago that said 60% of Americans ask a medical question at least monthly, or maybe that was a use it at all. The general rule that I've observed, and Hugo, please, you have so much knowledge and practical experience. I hope you'll bust in at some point. But the people don't pick up a new tool like this until they have a problem. So questions of how many people are doing it is not really an indicator. It's not like how many people have bought iPhones, right? And the what I think is that the question, Matt, you mentioned the question, do people know what they're doing? Or you ask something comparable, how skilled are they? I'm sure everyone listening remembers just a few weeks ago, there was a scandalous article in JAMA about how GPT outperformed doctors at a suite of diagnostic questions. And the important thing in that, first of all, the New York Times article, surprise, surprise, their headline skewed the whole thing. Very few people went and read the original study. But the important thing is how it came to be that doctors using GPT, I think it was got 78% right, and doctors without GPT got 76% right. But if you cut out the doctor and just fed the whole problem to GPT, it got 90% plus right. And the big reason, they listed two reasons why doctors failed to do that. Number one, the doctors being human had this problem of anchoring bias, right? Once they thought, I bet this is XYZ, they then rejected the advice of the AI. Now, that's not an unsolvable problem. You just teach them. Oh, be aware of that. And you can easily imagine somebody just leading people through an exercise, and they should be smarter about that. But the other thing was that half the doctors have not yet realized this thing is not like Google. You don't just ask it one question. You hand it a whole problem. Now, the average consumer in their living room might treat it the same way, right? But you see a few examples of what people like Hugo or my friend Jack, a few miles from here, are doing. They're like serious stuff. Hugo and Jack both had problems with trying to get their providers to trying to figure out what's the best thing to do for our next course of treatment. And that for those, it's the extended conversation you can have, right, that can lead on. Hugo, you want to?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can comment on how I have been using it, and perhaps share some practical tips, I suppose, on how other folks could use it. As to start, I don't use just one tool. I subscribe to as many tools as I can afford to, because each one of them is a little different and does a little bit some things better than other things. And I don't trust just one AI. In the same way that I don't trust just one clinician. I like to have have enough information to make up my own mind on what I think makes the most sense for me. So the way I've been using these tools has been mostly to help me think through problems. And in the example that Dave mentioned earlier with my dad, I fed the AI notes from a visit that my dad had with his PCP. I fed blood test results. And a document, a Google document with some of his preferences and our goals. And of course, pictures of the rash, the problem that we're there to try to solve. Even though we had been referred to a dermatologist, we were waiting for the appointment, which was months away, like 3 or 4 months. So we didn't really have a choice but to use AI to solve it. And the way, like I said, in the way that I use these the tools in this particular case was to help me think through the problem. So once I fed all this background knowledge to the AI, I then asked for it to give me to create a column with the differential diagnosis for the condition. And so what, number one, and I asked specifically for the table to be organized in the order of likelihood, the most likely diagnosis on top. On the second column, I asked for the AI to provide the rationale for why it thinks it was that diagnosis. I wanted to double check the thinking. And this is even before we started seeing models like the O1 and the models that kind of expose you to the thinking steps, so you can verify it, what the machine is doing. So I asked, the second column was the rationale, and the third column I asked for the intervention, because I didn't, since we're going to go see the dermatologist anyway, I figured it didn't really matter what the diagnosis would be if the interventions were the same. So I could just go for the intervention and find some relief of the symptoms. And at that point, the diagnosis didn't really matter. And so to me, what's important, I think, is that patients will still have to bring along with them their research skills, their critical thinking, some data literacy, their technical proficiency, and all these things that are will still be needed. You can't just delegate it to the AI at this point. There may be one day when we'll just delegate it to a team of AI agents and they will get the job done. But even then, I doubt that I will trust a team of agents in the same way that I don't really trust a team of clinicians. I have to understand what's happening as much as I can in order to insert my will and my self-advocacy and my agency into the mix, which is what's most important to me. But that may not be the case for everybody. So folks will use these tools in different ways. For me, I don't see myself ever delegating decision-making entirely to a tool like this.
So I have two follow-ups from that. First one is, I mean, that's a relatively sophisticated approach, right? So, Julie, we're talking about getting together a sort of publicity campaign around explaining to people how to use this, and how do we get people to Hugo's level? That's the first question. Second question is, do we actually require a group of either lay advocates like yourselves or a profession of, a la Grace Cordovanas of the world, of board certified people who do this for a living, to actually help sort of explain this and manage the care of people, to use it, who have a problem and aren't at the Hugo's level of using this. So how do you balance those two?
Yeah, so just as it was necessary to create an organization like eCourt to build online communities, after seeing the benefit that I saw in the first two that I joined, I think we are going to need to have a nonprofit that specializes in helping large number of people learn enough how to prompt to make those tools efficient, and have enough literacy to be able to assess the value of what they get from those tools, because as Hugo says, each tool is different. Some are very good at doing certain things, and some are more inclined to do some mistakes, especially when you start looking for references. It was impossible to get right references even a year ago. You would get 100% hallucinations. Today, it's better for some, not, and even for those where it's better today, you are still at risk of getting wrong references. So you can't trust that yet. I'm sure that this will get resolved over time, but you have to teach people to learn what the limitations of the tools are today. Even with their limitations, they are incredible to help you think exactly what Hugo is saying. You have to understand that those Gen AI are tools that complement human abilities, which was not the case with the search engine. And one thing that we've discussed, the three of us, multiple times, all the conversations. So the healthcare blog is mostly in general people that work in the healthcare system, right? Mm-hmm. What we are discussing here is a very different thing. Most of the conversations that we have seen about the use of AI in medicine is about how AI can help different parts of the systems or services, how it can help people be more efficient, make more money, spend less time, etc. What we are discussing here is totally different. It's more about personalized medicine. How can those tools help me with my specific problem today? And, and if the system was working perfectly, we would not need those tools. But we know that the systems are not working, and it will never work, basically. Whatever system, whatever transformation we make, it will never work well enough so that we don't have to use those tools.
Yeah. Well, go on, Dave. I was just saying that the concept is build a nonprofit to sort of spread the information, spread the advocacy, and perhaps create a forum for, specialist sort of advisors, navigators here.
So
that's one thing. Go ahead.
let me give you another example. So from what I learned from ACOR, it is very important if when you start to talk about very complex diseases like rare cancers and basically all the rare disorders, to have access to the most current scientific information. The problem is that it's very difficult to read scientific articles. Peer-reviewed articles are very complicated, full of jargon, etc. I have been playing for a few months with the different AI tools so that, like, in 1 minute, I can feed a PDF of the most complex article and come back with a short summary written in 10th grade English that is going to let people know what is the value of this article, what new does it provide, and how useful is it for your case. And then for those who want to learn how to assess the value of scientific article, it does a very long review and rates like 20 different things about the article to let you know if it's worthwhile spending the time to read it or not.
An important thing about what he's doing there, two things. First of all, everything that Hugo and I have done is with off-the-shelf stuff that is not tuned to medicine. We don't yet have products that are tuned to medicine. The other thing is that Gilles has put in a ton of work into making sure that what his thing generates actually is accurate. It is not hallucinating, generally. My favorite hallucination story is a few months ago, I got a speaking gig in Barcelona, and I asked them, how did they decide to bring me over? And they laughed and they said, we asked ChatGPT, who's the best patient empowerment speaker? So I tried to do that myself just for amusement. And I tried it several different times with different wording, which is something I learned from Hugo. And on the third time, it said, 3 good patient speakers are Michael J. Fox, he has Parkinson's, Magic Johnson, a celebrity AIDS patient, and the third one it mentioned was Elizabeth Holmes. I said,
She
mean the
may
one-
not be available to travel to Barcelona due to other outside circumstances. So,
but Matt, a minute ago you asked, should we require some, like, I don't know, board of authority or something?
I'm not saying require, but should we establish one, right?
Well, establishing one that's available and helpful. Okay, that's good. I thought you said, should we require? Because you remember back in 2006 when Britannica got all huffy about Wikipedia?
Yep.
Right, and they did this big test, and wasn't it Science magazine or was it Nature that organized the thing? And Wikipedia, this is really important. Wikipedia and Britannica got approximately the same number of questions right and wrong, but the response of the organizations was so telling. This is what happens when people get an authority. Britannica put out a press release about how the study was flawed. The Wikipedia community got together and said, how do we get so many things wrong? And within 3 days, they'd fixed all the errors, right? Authority gets attached to being the authority. And I have nothing against people who actually are smart, right? But we do not want people in power to be squashing everyone, saying that we need their brilliance.
I'm absolutely in the idea of, how can you help people who are sort of first-time users? Go back to yourself in 2006, Dave. Find the A course, right? An A course at that stage, and I don't know, I haven't looked into it lately, Gilles, but back in the day, certainly had skilled authorities on there who were understanding the medical literature and could point you out where to go and help. It had lay people who were very, very smart, very well informed, using the tools such as there was then available. I think there's room for advertising that and advertising that as a service. We've always had patient navigators. The other thing we have now, and not that many of them, but our friends at Transcarent have got one, and some others, is like an AI-based patient navigator telling you where to go and giving you information. Now, those are commercially available. They may be starting with baby steps at the moment, but it's not hard, as you talk about personalization, to imagine feeding into them things like your current medical record, things like your current remote patient, data coming from different tools that are monitoring you, your Apple Watch, whatever, lab results, all that kind of stuff, coming back with a sort of monitoring service saying, here's where you may be going out of whack and have a problem, just as remote patient monitoring should be doing, but that's usually a manual function now, making that automated and 24/7. And then also coming back and saying, this thing's trending, you may want to look at this advice from whatever, or here's an AI, here's a piece of literature we suggest you take a look at, or, here's a summary of that cancer thing because there may be some new discovery in the disease that you have, or whatever. You can imagine the process of searching using the chat, using the large language model, getting automated and being delivered as a service. People have tried this kind of thing over time for patients, hasn't really caught on because it's hard to do, but you have to imagine it's going to get easier to do with these tools.
So Matthew, let me advertise a new tool created by the International Myeloma Foundation. They have a chatbot called Myelo that is designed specifically, has been fed all that needs to be fed so that a patient who has been told that he may have multiple myeloma can come there and basically chat with that bot and get all the information they need about their case. This is one of the first real example where I see that this is facing the public, and I think it's going to be immensely useful for people.
And I would think for, myeloma or whatever, you could feed images, going back to Hugo's MRI, if you could feed the image into it, which I think Elon Musk was asking people to feed them into Grok. So then how much we trust Musk, but down that path, right? The more you can tell it about yourself, and obviously there's ways this will be worked out with privacy and the rest of it. But it strikes me that there's a lot that we can imagine to come from these things, which is going to be both a boon to patients and it's going to be a challenge for how that integrates with the current healthcare system and the current care from doctors.
And the speed of changes and evolutions of those LLMs is a problem by itself, because what you know today will be obsolete in 3 months. And we're going to need to have organizations that follow up what are the tools of today to maximize the effect.
But make no mistake, you don't have to be a Hugo, right? Or
Yes.
my friend Jack or whatever to get value out of this. Everyone here, I'm sure, knows the name Sue Sheridan, this phenomenal world-level patient safety leader who has had 2 tragedies in her family because of medical errors. And just this year, she had something go wrong, and she went to an emergency room. They drove 3 hours to get to what they believed would be the best emergency room they could get at from their home in Utah. And the doc said, he literally recommended benign neglect. You didn't have a stroke, so go home and keep an eye on it. And this just didn't seem right. They went home and she just typed, she had never touched AI before, right? She just typed about a dozen words into it, and it came back and said, among other things, might be Bell's palsy. It needs to be treated within 48 hours or it becomes permanent harm. And so they went back to another emergency room and got treated. You don't have to be a wizard to get value out of this. And so, anyway, I could go on.
So let me ask you. So there's a couple of subtleties here, right? One is the development of specific chatbots like Milo that you mentioned, so which is already being pre-tuned to a particular disease state, and obviously people can find those. The other is using just general ChatGPT or Claude or one of the big LLMs, and I've seen that, you know, for a while now, some doctors have been using those for curbside consults. I've got a patient who looks like this. What should I do? Feed information. It spits back a process or things to ask about. And the third is using search engines, which are increasingly delivering real world sort of AI-based answers. So you obviously have Perplexity in that zone, but even Gemini from Google is now showing up in standard Google results. So Hugo, what are you, what are you tending towards when you are looking for answers and doing searches? Where do you think is sort of the best place to be going?
Yeah, when I say I use all of these tools, is that I use them at the same time, and it depends a little bit. The starting point for me depends a little bit on the problem that I'm trying to solve. So if I am trying to understand guidelines for, as it has happened not too long ago, I wanted to understand, there was a health situation I was dealing with, and I was trying to understand the management of hypertension in patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which can be a little bit tricky. And for a problem like this, I would likely start with Notebook LM, a tool like that allows me to feed a ton of papers and guidelines and evidence based papers written in medical literature, and then ask questions of that data. But I often use these tools. I use one LLM to query the other one. Like, say, for example, a lot of I've been using Open Evidence more recently, and I find that to be very useful. I have a lot of times I ask, I want to make sure I'm asking the question in using the proper medical jargon in order to get the best quality response. And so I type up a draft of the question into one LLM, and then I say, how would I say this in medical jargon? Help me refine this prompt for another LLM in medical jargon. And it will then refine that prompt. And then I'll pick up that prompt and feed it into another LLM and work with these tools at the same time. So I
have a great idea. Can I ask ChatGPT, how would Hugo Campos do it? Is there a little primer on what you just said, how you do it and how you've been doing? Because you said several things there, right? Number of different LLMs and tools you're using, number of ways to ask them, number of ways to ask it to enhance the way you ask it. there's a bunch of stuff in there which I think gets you. In the end, the question is, can you get to the correct answer and figure out the piece of information you need? And I would suspect that as we said, you thought a lot more about this and done a lot more than the average person. Yes, I mean, Susan Sheridan may be able to type in one question and get a good answer, and why not? That's great. But obviously, you've got to help the chat GPT along. Dave?
So I just popped open Chat GPT and I typed, how would Hugo Campos? Oh, come on.
You have to share your screen.
I got too many windows going. How would Hugo Campos advise new AI users to get started? And it replied, Hugo Campos, a strong advocate for patient empowerment and thoughtful use of technology, would likely advise new AI users to start with a deliberate exploratory approach. 1, define your goals. 2, experiment with, and I'm not giving you the sub-bullets. So
he's already famous for this, and B, that's great, because that's actually a very
that's
the sort of helpful way to think about it.
So two things about getting started with this. A key thing, I hate to shock you, but sometimes there are some ignorant pissing contests on LinkedIn where people want to display how august and pontificatable they are.
Oh, I thought they had to be honored, humbled, and prostrate on the ground. But maybe if you want.
Yeah, well. Anyway, I have found that people who are pontificating stupid opinions about AI can be silenced by asking them with a smile, what's the most fascinating or fun thing you've ever done with generative AI? And what you always get back is a blank stare in text, because the people who are pontificating about how dumb it is have not actually tried it. And so what I really, really want everyone to try, I gave a talk last week, and one of the women in the audience said that she's having it create a new bedtime story for her daughter every night, which is perfectly great. Or, give me some stuff to do this weekend. A lot of people will hesitate because they're not sure how to proceed. Well, guess what? You can tell the LLM, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, but I want to know more about XYZ. So here's my first question. And it will respond to you. The things are not just regurgitators of stuff they've read. To some extent, that's part of what they do. But they're trained to be what you want. That's why from the very beginning, you could say, give me your answer in Shakespearean English. Bert Rosen is a multi-cancer patient that we know. And he was discussing his most recent radiology reports. And he came back and said, so describe it to me like you're Jerry Seinfeld. And the thing came back and said, what's not to like? Everything looks good, right? And then he eventually convinced it to answer like Samuel L. Jackson, including cussing. I mean, it took him like 10 times to say, no, really, cuss, please. And my point is, you can get started without knowing what you're doing. And the beautiful thing is, after the first answer, Google is one and done, right? You ask a question, then you ask a different question, right? After with this stuff, you ask a question, and then you get to respond to its response. All right. So dive in, learn to ride the new pony.
Yeah, I'd also say there are some helpful shortcuts, right? So there's a guy called Greg Shove who was writing on Scott Galloway's blog, who had a whole thing about how to use AI as a thought partner, how to ask it, how to build up those difficult sort of multi-layer questions, and how do you figure that out? And are we going to see some increase in productivity and usefulness via that? And I think that's what Hugo's, your analysis of what did Hugo do. But I think it would be helpful. We have to tie Hugo down and make him write that primer, because that is a useful thing. I also do think there's going to be an increase both in humans, contextualizing and curating how to do this for other people, because by definition in healthcare, there are going to be people who, for whatever reason, are not able to do this themselves, or don't have the right access to caregivers to do it. And that's a way of scaling knowledge and scaling treatment, which is what technology should be doing. And I think there'll be, either targeted chatbots like the one, or targeted AI services like the one from Milo, or maybe the one from Transcarent, or many, many others doing this, which will, maybe they'll come from the big general purpose LLMs. Maybe they'll eat the world. Maybe there'll be specialist LLMs like are being built on top of those currently for ambient scribing and other tools that are reading the medical record. And they're going to have all kinds of uses. Many of them are going to be administrative and clinical within the world of the health system. But the same technology and the same capability of reading should be fed to make this transparent for patients. And I'm thinking very much, plugging open notes and that kind of stuff that you've all been involved in that world will be helpful as well.
So right along these lines, you have thousands of rare diseases. They all face the same problem, which is the complexity of getting the information. And every one of those organizations could get the benefit if there is a new organization, nonprofit or for-profit, doesn't matter, who specializes in the methodology of how to create smaller LLMs that are basically filtering in front of the large ones. The methodology is going to be the same. So I think that we're going to see in the not too distant future at least one organization that is going to provide these services to thousands of organizations for rare diseases. One thing that is really, I think, important to mention, even though you interact with those machines and you get the impression that you're talking with a human, you are talking to a machine, and machines don't know anything. They don't think, they compute. And so what Hugo is doing is basically doing iteration with a computing device. And the more there is iteration, the closer the response from this computing gets efficient and useful for the human being that is talking to them. Iteration is really the key.
One thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and I think it's really important, I hope as people listen to the archive of this idea will spread. One generative AI patient user we haven't mentioned is James Cummings. He has 2 kids with rare diseases, and they're seen at the Yale New Haven Health System. One of the kid with the rarest disease is seen by 4 different doctors in different hospitals in the Yale New Haven Health System, none of whom can see each other's records. All right. So what James is doing now, and anybody with a business brain is thinking there's an opportunity here. What James is doing is what Hugo has done very laboriously, a whole bunch of copying and pasting stuff together. So then he can show the composite view, the aggregate view to the doctors. So there he's actually helping the doctors with their work. And what he said in his blog post on PatientsUseAI, he said, what we need is an LHR, longitudinal health record, comprehensive health record. And it's going to take, one reason that AI did so much better on that diagnostic puzzle is because it was fed a really comprehensive, complicated set of data points, which it could absorb just super rapidly. Well, if you took out half of that, it might be less accurate, right? And doctors today and AIs today, if they have less information, are going to be less powerful. The last thing I want to mention is that Bart DeWitt, who lives in Berlin, is the head of an open AI, an open source AI foundation called Hippo, which is derived from Hippocrates. He has a small LLM model that runs in a laptop, which means if you've got the medical data in that machine, then nothing's even going out over the internet. Not to mention enormously less problem with energy consumption to run the thing. So we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
Enough.
So I need to, this has been my role since 2003, to mention that I can see on the screen, we are 4 white males. And we have been talking about all the great stuff that AI can do. But if we were Black, if we were Latinos, I guarantee you that the result would not be just as great. Systemic racism is a profound thing in medicine. And what LLMs have been fed is only the result of this systemic racism. And therefore,
Oh
they
God,
can only produce results that are good based on what they have been fed.
oh God, we're a mammal. Oh,
So I said there's a good side and a bad side to the LLM
Yeah.
in this. I had Robbie Pearl on talking about his book ChatGPT MD, and he said one of the things that he said was, look, we know we have this data about treatment levels and treatment outcomes based on race and gender and all this in the US, but at least AI can point this out and can point out what's going on at the point of care, helping people, clinical professionals and patients change decisions, change approaches. And all we can do, well, not all we can do, but one of the things we can do is identify these issues. Now, what you're talking about, Gilles, is not only is that going on, but also that, we don't have the same level of research. Back to the old story that women were left out of clinical trials entirely because they might be pregnant until 1980 or something ridiculous. So we've had these issues, and we still have these issues around research around minorities, or minorities in the US, but majorities in the rest of the world, but haven't had that adequate research. But I think AI can both point this out, as well as we can figure out how do we change that by getting more and better research for it to look at. But yes, it is true.
I think this is really, in reality, this is a really big topic. I think you should one day invite Chris Gibbons, MD, who has been doing research on health disparities for 30 years, and who is now deeply involved in doing the research on health disparities connected with AI.
So, I think we've been super optimistic about this issue, about the whole topic of AI on behalf of patients, but that's a huge I wouldn't say red flag, but a big orange flag, or whatever color the warning, pay attention, do something about it flag, rather than stop the race flag that they use in motor racing. The ones like, there's a crash around the corner, slow down and avoid it. We'll put the pace car in for a bit to try to help fix that, rather than to get off the track and stop the race. My sense is, though, that we're right to be optimistic, but there is an area in which, as I think you said, and there's a number of people who pointed this out. It's the use of the LLMs has, I think, it's coming into general search, which is one reason that I think it's used a lot. But the use of the big LLMs, it's still a little bit in general, a number of places where you can see the potential, but you're not getting, and it had very fast rise to first use because it was so easy, and available. You're not seeing the sort of absolute all day, everyday use beyond a relatively small adopter group. You are seeing a lot of use, but you're not seeing the use the same you're seeing of the use of Google or some of the other tools online. And I think part of that is because, as we pointed out, there hasn't been, for a lot of different things, enough general education about how to use it. And I think we've talked through some of that today. The other thing I think is that we haven't provided enough of these sort of tuned, specific, personalized tools that matter to you as a person looking for this precise thing. And clearly, there's a ton of work going on in the entrepreneurial and tech community to build those for all kinds of things. And there are tons of areas where, in healthcare, anybody listening to this, or anybody who picks up on this type of conversation elsewhere on the web, should be thinking about coming to people like you for advice, and others that we mentioned on this, and some of the people chatting on YouTube, including Sarah Agari and Holly Taylor and others, right? What is going on there? What should people be thinking about? Because there's so much potential here, right? So much potential for really improving the lives of everybody in healthcare. And that obviously includes doctors, because they don't want to wait around getting the wrong diagnoses. And then it improves, even the folks doing the admin. And we've heard about enough bad stories about admin all over healthcare the last few weeks, but no reason why that shouldn't be improved. And just yesterday, for example, I spoke to two companies. One was reading medical records to improve the life of a utilization review nurse. Now, we may not be keen about the way that utilization review is done at utilization management is done at health plans, but getting a nurse to the right answer to based on care guidelines sooner rather than later because the data was being read was a great idea. And the other one was a company building a general thing, which an enterprise or a tech company could slot into the middle of their product, which would enable them to use large language models in their product easily without having to build all that stuff themselves. And that could be used in a number of different ways in healthcare, but improving, the ability to generate a specific chatbot in a particular disease state, or to help a patient to deal with, to help customer service deal with patients, and or to, God knows, do data analysis or whatever. You can imagine any number of clever tools that are being built in that way. What we have to do is figure out how to get them to be tuned for people in healthcare, especially those with rare diseases or those with chronic diseases, and or how do we publicize this and make this available to as many patients as possible? Yeah. So, you three have been great pioneers for so long, doing so much great work in this, and I want to commend you and thank you for continuing to do that. And as Dave said, you want to ride off into the sunset, but this is too important to ignore. Right. So let's just quickly go around and as we wrap this, I want a final word from each of you about what your suggestions, hopes, and next steps will be in this sort of new world of AI in patient new world of patients using AI. If that's the hashtag, even if Elon doesn't want us to use hashtags anymore. Why don't I start with you, Gilles?
So I remember Kevin Kelly just blowing up my mind when he said, "Do you realize that the iPhone is only 5,000 days old? What will happen in another 5,000 days?" Here.
How recently was that?
Sorry?
Well, 5,000 days is about 13 years. So it's
12, 13 years.
So it's probably what 7,000 days now.
Yeah. So just remember what we knew about what those phones would do a year after they started. Nothing compared to what it became. This is going to be the same on steroid. We are just in the infancy of this really revolution. And it's impossible. It is moving so fast that I'm not going to tell you what will be in 1 year. I can't know. I just know that it's going to accelerate everything. And here is a tiny example. Everybody's using wearables, but they generate data which is usually not put together. Somebody like Hugo or me or Dave or many other people or anybody with like engineering background or knows how to use a computer is going to be easily able to put together the data coming from all those wearables and make a decision about their health and what they should do based on this data without having ever an interaction with a healthcare professional.
Hugo.
Yeah, I want to start with with an invitation. I sort of want to invite every person. I was going to say patients, but now I'm thinking it's everyone really to spend some time with these tools every single day. Make it a habit to spend 15 to 30 minutes playing around with these, asking health questions, and it may be a simple thing about your own health, but really kind of get your skill level to a place where you can actually get real value out of these tools when the day comes, God forbid, that you actually need these for some serious application. So not just wait until you have some serious health question to ask. The other thing is I look forward to the day when, and it's probably coming soon. I don't know. It feels like it's within years. But I look forward to the day when I can go on an app store or an AI agent store and buy an agent that is trained on dealing with insurance issues or billing issues, buy another agent that specializes in care coordination, and plugging all these AI tools and agents into my data. And I can see this as a perfectly reasonable business opportunity for folks who may who may think this is something that we need. I think that's something we need. And I'd hope that one day will come when we'll have these tools practicing medicine. And I'm sorry to say this, and I think regulation needs to get to a place where we need to loosen up some places. I may regret what I'm saying. I hope I won't. But it seems like there is great potential there, and I would hate for us to miss opportunities because we're being fearful of this, or because we're not being smart enough to understand the technology and know how to use it to our best advantage.
No, I agree completely on that latter point.
Hugo, sorry, Hugo, based on what the NVIDIA founder said, like I think less than 2 weeks ago, you won't have an app store for agents. You are going to have agents that are going to help you find all the agents you need for any specific question.
But I'd also add on Hugo's point about practicing medicine. There are some areas, and I think you can think about things like mental health counseling and all that, where we're pretty close, right? We've got to figure out the regulations, because there are areas like that where there's an incredible shortage of knowledge, and if we can't use technology like this to scale access to care across the world, right? I mean, there's a shortage of people in the US, but think about the shortage of people in sub-Saharan Africa and God knows where else, where they all have phones, right? But they don't have access to doctors, and they don't mean, and the doctors will, the doctors have left to go to rich countries in Europe or North America. I think that's to me, we've got to figure that out. Dave, I'll give you the final word.
Okay, yeah, I just want to mention, I'm glad you mentioned sub-Saharan Africa, because more than 10 years ago, in the earlier part of my speaking, a side effect of being an obsessive speaker is that you get to see hundreds of other sessions at conferences that you otherwise would never have been at. And we were in the phase where people were saying, but wait, should we move forward with the internet being a good thing in healthcare when people in disadvantaged areas don't have access to it? Concern about the digital divide, right? And somebody put up a slide which was of a really remote area, and there was this line of women carrying jugs of water back from the water hole, and there's no electricity, no nothing anywhere. Anyway, and she stopped, and her cell phone in her pocket was ringing. Right, and that there is more access. I mean, the concerns we have are legitimate, but we really need to go find out what the reality is. And I want to reinforce for all of us what Hugo said. Please don't be in mystery about this stuff. Try it yourself. It doesn't have to be with complicated medical questions. Okay, I'm going to just mention a couple of things from my ChatGPT sidebar recently. I have a sister. I didn't know what to get her for Christmas, so I just rambled a bit into it, and the thing came back with 5 really surprisingly good ideas. And the let's see. I was driving to a nonprofit lunch a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden my Prius dashboard said, "Front camera error, see service manual." What the hell? My service manual? Where's my service manual? And besides, that thing is not indexed well. Anyway, Google gave me nothing, so I opened GPT, and it helped me solve the problem on the spot. There's just no... Use it for everything. You don't have to buy the paid versions. Become experienced. Don't be a clueless newbie for the rest of your life, or because that's when you'll start to discover for yourself how different this is and what you can trust it for and where you need to be careful. New world, folks. Get on the horse. And don't you dare tell me that patients are going to hurt themselves with information, so they need to be taken care of by authorities.
Yeah.
All right, I'm glad we ended with the ePatient Dave deBronkart anti-authority stance. That was the special THCB gang special on Patients Use AI. Hugo Campos, Gilles Frydman, ePatient Dave deBronkart on the race to patient autonomy, and lots of words of wisdom there on how to be autonomous, how to think yourself using these tools, and how these tools might change the way we do healthcare. So with that, this is Matthew Holt saying that's the end of the THCB gang for today, December the 19th. We're actually back next week with a Christmas special just on Monday, December the 23rd, where I have some special guests and my traditional end of year Christmas special. But for this special, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank Gilles, Hugo, and Dave for being on, for all the work they're doing, and let's hope that that we get to use the real promise of these tools as soon as we can. And with that, thanks. And that's the end for this session.